Ralph Waldo Emerson was a lecturer, writer, poet, and philosopher who, in line with the purest form of the American ideal, encouraged his audience to trust thyself. One of 5 surviving children of a single mother, Emerson would rise from humble beginnings to become one of the country's most influential writers. Emerson was born on May 25, 1803, the son of a preacher in Boston, Massachusetts. Emerson would spend the majority of his childhood being raised by his mother, Ruth Haskins, and occasionally by his aunt, Mary Moody Emerson. He graduated from Boston Latin School early at the age of only 14 and entered Harvard, where, at age 18, he would graduate in the middle of his class. After Harvard, Emerson migrated down to Charleston, South Carolina, and later to St. Augustine, Florida, where he first encountered slavery. About this experience, he wrote, "One ear therefore heard the glad tidings of great joy, whilst the other was regaled with, 'Going, gentlemen, going.'" It seems that, to Emerson, the notion of 2 very separate American experiences became instantly clear. Perhaps it was this notion of barriers unchallenged that influenced Emerson's writings on deeper, more inspired thinking. Emerson's transcendentalist views were grounded in his beliefs that nature and God were not separate, but that God was in fact a part of nature. Philosophically considered, he said, the universe is composed of nature and the soul. The 1830s and 1840s were Emerson's most prolific period of writing, as evidenced by his most well-known works, Experience, Poet, and Self-Reliance. Emerson's essay Self-Reliance was first published in a collection of essays released in 1841, though the work itself began to take shape over the years 1836 and 1837 while Emerson was lecturing at the Masonic Temple in Boston. In Self-Reliance, Emerson takes on the role of criticizing a conformist mindset and uses the essay to defend his idea that one should trust thyself. Emerson begins his essay by stating that genius, or greatness of the mind, is not unique to some, but rather is available to all. It is only because of pressure to conform or fear of what others might think that we fail to be true to ourselves. Emerson says, to believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. In the middle of the essay, Emerson goes on to condescend modern man for his willingness to sacrifice his own values and ideas in order to avoid making waves or going against the cultural grain. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet, he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. This is where what is perhaps the essay's most well-known and lasting line comes from. Here, Emerson says, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines." Emerson closes the essay by proposing that contemporary man has become shamefully timid, afraid of taking a personal stance or making declarations of self, choosing rather to stand behind ancient texts or the ideas of notable men of the past. This stance is made even more remarkable in the context of today's internet youth culture, where popular websites such as Tumblr and Imgur exist for the purpose of reposting existing pictures, quotes, and ideas. I believe, in a wider context, that Emerson is disparaging the frequent habit of man to use the ideas of a leader, or the writing or, in the case of the Bible, collective writings of an author or authors to justify a belief or action. It seems that Emerson favors each man taking into account his own life, his own experiences, his own mind, and the truths found therein. Much like the title of the essay suggests, Emerson encourages each man to discover and follow his own path. Unlike self-reliance, experience had never taken form as a lecture. In Experience, which appeared in the 1844 collection Essays, second series, Emerson delves into the long and confusing path that is life. Emerson touches on perspective and how hard it is to realize the repercussions of our life while we are still living it. Each man, like the genius discussed in Self-Reliance, is given all that he needs in order to not only survive, but also to prosper. However, the problem with man is that while living our own lives, our perspective is often limited to our immediate surroundings. The years teach much which the days never know, says Emerson. Without a sense of the condition and needs of the greater world around us, or of our size and place in this world, it is often impossible to tell, at least in that moment in time, whether or not our actions are productive. Emerson goes on to discuss how a man's perspective can be hindered by his temperament and lack of focus. He acknowledges that we can only be aware of the things that we can see, suggesting that his tone here is not accusatory. However, if the natural genius that Emerson suspects we are all gifted with at birth cannot pierce through the fog of a stubborn attitude, the unwillingness to either seek out or to accept a higher level of knowledge, then that genius, that gift, is wasted and no progress will come. As a wise man once said, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." Emerson then goes on to point out, rather ironically, that though we often tend to get stuck in one unchanging idea, we are also limited by our inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to focus too long on a single text, philosophy, or challenging thought. Rather, we are wont to seek out the greater idea, the next big thing. Of what use is a genius, he asks, if the organ is too convex or too concave and cannot find a focal distance within the actual horizon of human life? And it is this tendency to look above and beyond our reach, Emerson believes, that prevents us from cracking the shell of a potentially powerful idea already at hand, or, as is sometimes the case, unraveling a poorly constructed one. Perhaps those who are not thinking deeply enough, questioning enough of their own motives, or seeking a wider perspective on their actions, are simply at a loss for direction. This appears to be Emerson's thinking in The Poet, which appeared alongside Experience in a slew of essays published in 1844. In The Poet, Emerson writes of the importance of a poet to the national identity of a country, especially a developing one. He says, possibly in response to his beliefs of the general society's lackluster attempts at divining the heavier meanings out of life, that a poet can and should serve as a seer, an oracle of sorts, that draws the lessons out of culture, nature, and life as a whole, and shares them in a more easily digestible form with the rest of his society. Emerson says that a poet should write what men at large can feel, but cannot themselves find the words to express. In this, Emerson himself was quite successful. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of America's first and most influential writers and poets, forever changed what was acceptable to write about in a widely available context, and challenged not only the American people, but the world at large, with ideas that are just as relevant, if not more so, today.